United Nations Headquarters, New York, September 19, 2025. As the United Nations prepares to open its 2025 General Assembly and convene a high-stakes summit on the Palestinians, Secretary-General Antonio Guterres issued one of his starkest warnings yet. In an exclusive interview with AFP from the UN headquarters in New York, Guterres described the catastrophic humanitarian and political landscape unfolding in Gaza and the West Bank and sounded the alarm about the fragility of the international system itself. The tone of his remarks was not diplomatic understatement, but urgency, frustration, and even despair. His words landed just days before world leaders descend on Manhattan, where the Palestinian crisis is expected to dominate corridors of power. Guterres did not mince words when asked about the situation in Gaza. He directly accused Israel of pursuing a calculated strategy that, in his view, has left Palestinians without any viable path to sovereignty. Antonio Guterres said, "There has been a steady progression of measures by the Israeli government to completely destroy Gaza and implement a creeping annexation of the West Bank. So the issue is not the pretext, but the steady, step-by-step action taken by the government of Israel to not allow the Palestinians to have a state." This was not the polished ambiguity of UN speak. Instead, it was a pointed criticism of Israeli policy couched in the language of deliberate design. By using phrases like completely destroy Gaza and creeping annexation, the Secretary-General suggested that what the world is witnessing is not the byproduct of a conflict spiraling out of control, but a strategic choice made by Israel's government. In his repetition, he underlined the point. There has been a constant progress of the measures of the Israeli government in order to now completely destroy Gaza and have a creeping annexation in the West Bank. So, the question is not the pretext that might be used. The question is the constant action that has been step by step being put in place by the government of Israel not to allow the Palestinians to have a state. The implications of such statements are extraordinary. For the head of the United Nations to publicly characterize Israeli policy in these terms at a moment when tensions are already at their peak sets the stage for fierce diplomatic confrontation during the Assembly week. Beyond condemnation, Guterres raised a fundamental question that strikes at the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. If a two-state solution is being deliberately undermined, then what remains? Antonio Guterres asked, what is the alternative? A one-state solution where millions of Palestinians will either be expelled or subjected to occupation, subjugation, discrimination, without rights to their own land. This is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. The rhetorical question is damning. By framing the issue in these terms, the Secretary-General drew a clear line. Without a viable two-state framework, the only alternative is perpetual injustice. His description, expelled, occupation, subjugation, discrimination, evoked images of apartheid and ethnic cleansing, words that carry enormous political weight in the international arena. Diplomats preparing their speeches for the General Assembly will no doubt seize on this phrasing. It may embolden states already leaning toward recognizing Palestine while hardening Israel's opposition and angering its allies.
Great. Perfect.
That at some point the two-state solution is not geographically fit. Financial issues, conflicts, record number of conflicts. Can 140 countries only have submitted formal new NDCs? Should we start panicking?
No. There has been a constant progress of the measures of the Israeli government in order to now completely destroy Gaza and have a creeping annexation in the West Bank. So, the question is not the pretext that might be used, the question is the constant action that has been step by step being put in place by the government of Israel not to allow the Palestinians to have a state. What is the alternative? A one-state solution in which millions of Palestinians either would be expelled or would be submitted to occupation, to subjugation, to discrimination, having no rights in their own land. This is totally unacceptable in the 21st century. So And what we are witnessing in Gaza is horrendous. It is the worst level of death and destruction that I've seen in my time as Secretary-General, probably in my life. When you have multipolarity and you do not have a multilateral system, the result was war. And so, as the world moves more and more into a multipolar situation, the truth is that multilateral institutions will be more necessary than ever. But of course,
Pressed further on the humanitarian catastrophe, Guterres' words became even more visceral. He spoke not just as a political leader, but as a witness to human suffering. Antonio Guterres declared, "What we are witnessing in Gaza is horrendous. It is the worst level of death and destruction that I've seen in my time as Secretary-General, probably in my life." The gravity of this statement is difficult to overstate. Guterres, who has overseen crises from Syria to Yemen to Ukraine, placed Gaza's devastation above them all. For an official known for his cautious, often measured tone, this was a raw and emotional appeal. It was also a calculated move. By stressing, probably in my life, the Secretary-General personalised the tragedy, moving beyond statistics to convey the scale of human loss. With images of bombed-out neighbourhoods and mass civilian casualties dominating global news feeds, his words gave the UN's moral authority a sharp edge. But Guterres did not stop with the Israeli-Palestinian crisis. He connected Gaza's devastation to a broader malaise, the weakening of the multilateral order. Antonio Guterres warned, in a situation where you have multipolarity and you don't have a multilateral system, the result was war. The world is becoming more and more multipolar, and the truth is that multilateral institutions will be more necessary than ever. But of course, they need to be reformed. Here, the Secretary-General was making a historical argument. The 20th century, he reminded, showed that when powerful blocs operate without effective global governance, the outcome is bloodshed. Now, with the world sliding deeper into multipolarity, Washington, Beijing, Moscow, Brussels, and rising regional powers, the need for cooperative institutions is greater than ever. And yet, he admitted, those institutions are failing. The United Nations itself is paralyzed by divisions in the Security Council, where the United States, Russia, and China often wield vetoes to block action. Calls for reform of the Council structure have grown louder, and Guterres' comment that they need to be reformed was an acknowledgement that the current architecture cannot cope with today's crises. These remarks come on the eve of the UN's largest annual gathering. Presidents, prime ministers, and foreign ministers from nearly every member state are expected in New York. The Palestinian question, long a fixture of assembly debates, is this year elevated to the top of the agenda. For weeks, diplomats have hinted at a showdown. Some countries, including France, Canada, and others, are weighing recognition of Palestinian statehood. Israel has already warned of severe consequences, and the United States faces renewed pressure to balance its historic alliance with Israel against growing domestic and international criticism. Against this backdrop, Guterres' interview serves as both a warning and a provocation. His bluntness ensures that the General Assembly cannot tiptoe around the humanitarian disaster in Gaza or the political paralysis of the peace process. Although the Secretary-General's focus was squarely on the Palestinians, his broader message resonates far beyond the Middle East. In Africa, conflicts in Sudan and the Sahel rage with little international coordination. In Europe, the war in Ukraine continues to test the UN's relevance. Across Asia, territorial disputes simmer as China asserts itself more aggressively. Guterres' argument is that without a functioning, reformed system of global cooperation, these crises will multiply. His call for multilateral reform is not just institutional housekeeping. It is, in his telling, a matter of global survival. The connection between Gaza and the fate of multilateralism is deliberate. By showing that the failure of international cooperation has left millions trapped in what he calls the worst level of death and destruction, Guterres is attempting to galvanize world leaders to act not only on Palestine, but on the broader architecture of global governance. Part of what makes this interview remarkable is its human tone. Too often, the language of diplomacy is stripped of emotion, drowned in jargon. Here, the Secretary-General allowed himself to speak with moral clarity. By repeating certain phrases, completely destroy Gaza, creeping annexation, totally unacceptable, he hammered home the urgency. By confessing that the current destruction is probably in my life the worst he has ever seen, he reminded the world that behind policy debates are flesh and blood tragedies. As the UN General Assembly opens, the Secretary-General's words will hang heavy in the air. For Israel, they may be dismissed as bias. For Palestinians, they are validation. For the broader international community, they are a challenge to decide whether to continue on a path of paralysis or to attempt the difficult work of reform and cooperation. In one sense, Guterres' interview is a cry of alarm. In another, it is a reminder of the UN's purpose. In a multipolar world sliding toward conflict, he is urging states not to abandon the only institutions capable of mediating their disputes. The question now is whether anyone will listen.